Hi, my name's Estelle. I came back to the house I grew up in, only to find my sister already changing the locks. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We'll move in here to live." No warning, no invitation, just entitlement. What started as family tension spiraled into police reports, forged documents, and betrayal I never imagined possible. They got arrested, but that wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something darker. Want to know how far blood will go to cut you out of your own life? I stepped out of the rental car and onto the driveway, suitcase in one hand, the familiar thrill of coming home stirring somewhere in my chest. After 6 relentless months across continents, presentations in crowded boardrooms, strategy meetings that stretched long into the night, red-eye flights that blurred weeks into one another, this patch of quiet suburban Austin was supposed to be the place where I found myself again. The early spring light filtered golden through the budding trees, wrapping the cul-de-sac in warmth. The air smelled faintly of grass and pollen, the kind of suburban scent I used to take for granted. But something felt wrong. I couldn't name it at first, just the uneasy flicker at the edge of awareness, like a note played off-key. The first clue came before I even reached the steps. My mailbox was crammed, stuffed with flyers and unopened envelopes as though no one had touched it in weeks. I frowned. I had arranged for mail holds before leaving. The sight jarred me. I scanned the neighborhood. The lawns were still neat, the porches tidy, hanging baskets of flowers just starting to bud. Nothing looked out of place, except here, at my own curb. Parked too close to the curve of my driveway sat a dark sedan I didn't recognize. Tinted windows reflected the streetlights. My stomach tightened. I knew every car that belonged here. This one was foreign. I dropped my luggage on the steps and took in the porch. The light above the door was on, glowing faintly in the daylight. I never left that light on. In the corner where the dog's bowl usually rested, my golden retriever's daily ritual, there was nothing but a faint ring in the concrete where it had been. My throat tightened. I pressed forward, suitcase abandoned on the steps, my shoes crunching lightly against the gravel. The front door stood slightly ajar, a thin shadow cutting across the foyer. My pulse hammered. This was my house, wasn't it? I pushed the door open with my palm, the hinges creaking as if surprised to see me. "Hello?" My voice echoed back at me, swallowed by the silence. No bark, no warm rush of fur against my knees. My golden retriever should have been the first to greet me. Instead, there was only stillness. Darkness stretched down the hall. I flicked on the switch, and the light revealed suspended dust motes, swirling like tiny warnings. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and new paint. Something had changed, and then I heard it, footsteps, from upstairs. A man descended the staircase with deliberate ease, as though this was a path he had walked many times. He held a paint can in one hand, a roller in the other, his boots leaving faint smudges on my carpet. My breath caught. When his eyes met mine, there was no panic, no guilt. Only mild surprise, as though I had walked into his routine. "Oh," he said casually, adjusting his grip on the paint can. "I thought you were coming next week." My body froze. That voice, so calm, so casual, filled me with disbelief. I glanced at the roller tray he carried. It was one of mine. The same set I had purchased for my kitchen renovation project months ago before leaving. But I had never authorized work. This was not a homeowner's welcome. I forced my voice out, brittle but clear. "Excuse me. Why are you in my home?" The man shrugged, nonchalant, as though the question barely required thought. "Your sister sent me. We assumed you'd be late." My head spun. My sister. He never asked my name. He spoke as though I were a visitor trespassing on arrangements already made. Disbelief surged into rage. How dare he? In my own house. And then she appeared. Callista. She strolled in from the kitchen with grocery bags hooked at her wrist, her composure flawless. She paused when she saw me, then tilted her head with the faintest smile, like someone humoring a stranger. "You're back so soon," she said lightly. "Didn't you say you'd be out of town for weeks?" Her tone was so casual it sliced. My voice cracked with fury I couldn't disguise. "Why am I seeing strangers in my house?" Callista's expression didn't falter. She shifted the bags onto the counter, then turned back, her smile widening. Don't be dramatic, Estelle. We're moving in here now. It just makes sense. The house is big, you're always traveling, and it's empty most of the time. The words hit like cold water, each syllable carrying entitlement I couldn't comprehend. My chest clenched, my lips parted, but for a moment no sound came. She was treating my life, my home, like a vacant property to be redistributed, as though my absence erased my ownership. Finally, I forced myself to speak. My pulse thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. You never asked me. Her laugh was soft, dismissive. Do I need your permission? She replied, the edge of condescension in her tone sharp enough to cut. We're family. Family helps each other. Why waste a beautiful home? My mind raced. Deeds, sale papers, trust documents. I had every legal tie to this property. None of it bore her name. Yet she spoke with the arrogance of inevitability, as if questioning her claim made me the selfish one. I turned back to the man on the stairs, still holding my roller tray. Why are you moving my things? He shrugged again, unmoved. That's what she asked. Humiliation and fury burned hot through me, clashing until I felt dizzy. This wasn't help. This wasn't family. This was theft, displacement disguised as care. I had built this home, paid for it, maintained it, loved it. And now, I stood watching strangers repurpose it as though it were theirs by default. I stumbled backward toward the open door, struggling to maintain composure. My throat burned raw, words churning but refusing to form. My hands trembled as I reached the porch, the evening air rushing cool against my flushed skin. Behind me, Callista's husband was dragging a chair across the yard, positioning it beneath the window like he was setting up his living room. My chest heaved with rage, my phone slick in my hand. My finger trembled over the screen as I lifted it to my ear. You need to come here, I said into the receiver, my voice low but steady, my body shaking with fury. Now! The sun dipped lower, bleeding orange across the sky, and as I stood in the glow of what had once been my sanctuary, I realized the truth. This was not the end of a betrayal. This was the beginning of a war. I had barely enough time to exhale when my phone lit up in my hand. Rowan's reply came swift and certain. Be there in 20. I closed the door gently behind me, my pulse still roaring in my ears. The night air felt thin, almost brittle, as I hurried across the damp lawn toward the street. My suitcase rattled over the uneven concrete, its small wheels catching on cracks I'd memorized long ago. The dark sedan that had unsettled me earlier was gone. Good. But its absence did nothing to calm the storm building inside me. Instead, it left me alone with a heavier weight. The unanswered questions that clung like shadows. By the time Rowan's car rolled into my driveway, the neighborhood had gone quiet. Streetlights glowed overhead, throwing soft halos across the pavement. His sedan pulled up smoothly, headlights washing over the porch before dimming. He stepped out with the ease of someone who knew exactly why he'd been called. His suit jacket was flipped back casually, his tie loosened around his neck. Rowan's eyes met mine, steady and unwavering. Show me everything, he said, his voice low but decisive. We didn't linger on pleasantries. He followed me to the back door, where the shadows seemed to press closer against the walls. The lock clicked reluctantly as I turned it, and together we stepped into what had once been my sanctuary. The air inside was different. Where I remembered comfort, I found intrusion. The foyer smelled faintly of fresh paint and the harsh bite of varnish, overlaying the scent of wood polish I used to prefer. Everything familiar carried an undertone of something wrong. I steadied myself and kept my voice level. Something's wrong. My spare keys are gone. Rowan lifted his brow but didn't interrupt. Tell me more. I guided him into the kitchen, my steps purposeful but heavy. On the island, under the harsh glare of the overhead lights, lay two unfamiliar key tags. The labels were sharp in black ink. Main entry, back patio. My stomach knotted. These weren't here before. I reached for the deadbolt, twisting it slowly. The sound was unfamiliar, the click off-tempo from memory. My knuckles tightened against the counter until my hand whitened. Rowan crouched down, examining the lock with practiced eyes. He touched the mechanism gently, testing the tension. When he rose, his expression carried gravity. "This is deliberate," he said softly. "It's not a misunderstanding." A cold flush crept across my face. I had expected excuses, maybe denial, but not this. Not the audacity of changed locks in my own home. Rowan straightened, his tone firm now. "We'll audit every lock, every key made since you left. I want the garage access too." I nodded, swallowing against the thickness in my throat. My voice was barely more than a whisper. "Did Callista do this?" He shook his head slightly, calculating. "She might not need to. Someone on her side could have acted. A contractor. A friend. But this wasn't random." I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened social media. Together, we scrolled in silence. And then I found it. A Facebook Live feed. The title blazed across the screen. "Family Rebuilding Weekend." The video shook slightly as someone carried the phone through the house. And there she was, Callista, standing in the entryway, voice warm, posture confident. She spoke about restoring the family legacy. She walked the camera slowly past the walls I had chosen, the repairs I had personally paid for, the colors I had painted with aching hands after long work weeks. She presented it as hers, a gift she was giving back. I was invisible. No mention. The comments streamed in, filling the screen like a tide. "What a beautiful family home. Callista is so caring. Thank you for doing this for your parents." Each line struck sharper than the last, slicing away pieces of me as strangers praised her for theft dressed as kindness. My chest tightened. I couldn't tear my eyes from the screen, though every word poisoned me. Rowan leaned closer, his voice quiet but unflinching. "Estelle, this is theft. Of more than property. She's stealing your story." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. For a moment, I let the sting burn before I blinked them away. I refused to cry here, not in front of her lens, not where she could twist even my tears into performance. I closed the laptop sharply, the sound echoing like a verdict. "I'm done holding back." My voice surprised me with its finality. I rose from my chair, my steps echoing through the hallway as I marched toward the living room. The house seemed to vibrate with my anger, each corner heavier with evidence of her presence. Furniture I had chosen was shoved aside, repurposed, dressed with new throws that weren't mine. My identity was being dismantled in real time. She was already there. Callista, sitting with the easy grace of someone entirely unbothered, the lamplight turning her features soft and unearned. She looked up as I entered, her expression calm, casual, as though this confrontation were simply another scene in her performance. "You didn't ask," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "You just moved in." She tilted her head, a smile playing at her lips. "I'm doing what's right for the house. Don't make this personal." Her words stung, dismissive, manipulative, wrapped in faux righteousness. "It is personal," I shot back, my voice cracking through the room. "You're treating my life like something to be redistributed." Rowan, standing discreetly in the corner, clicked his phone, recording the exchange. Callista's smile never wavered. Her tone dripped with mock pity. "Maybe you're just making a scene." I inhaled deeply, grounding myself. "Maybe I will." Her expression faltered, if only for a second. I turned sharply and strode toward the door, my legs trembling but steady. Each step felt like both defeat and defiance. My hand shook as I pulled the door open, the night air rushing over me in a wave of cool relief. I stepped outside, leaving confusion and anger swirling behind me, leaving her staged comfort in ruins of its own making. The night was alive with sound, wind brushing through the trees, the faint hum of passing cars, the steady rhythm of my own breath. I reached my car, the engine humming low when I started it, headlights spilling light across the driveway like a spotlight on my escape. I gripped the steering wheel, leaned back, and whispered to myself, "They think I'll break, but I've spent a lifetime being quiet, not anymore. They think I'll break, but I've spent a lifetime being quiet, not anymore." I lay in the darkness of my bedroom, every beat of my heart hammering against my ribs as if it were trying to tear itself free. The silence was not peaceful. It was suffocating, a pressure against my chest. I stared at the shadowed corners of the room, the familiar outlines warped by the dim slant of moonlight filtering through the blinds. Nothing looked quite right. Even the glow of the moon seemed foreign, as though it too had been claimed. Against the far wall sat a suitcase. Not mine. Its bulky shape loomed like an accusation, a silent witness to the invasion of my space. I could almost feel its presence radiating through the room, reminding me that boundaries I had once believed sacred no longer existed. The air itself betrayed me. I had left behind the scent of cedar candles and my retriever's soft musk. Now, the space smelled faintly of fresh paint, mixed with an undertone of unfamiliar perfumes, the kind Callista favored, sharp, floral, uninvited. My sanctuary had been remade into something alien, and I was no longer the homeowner here, only a guest in my own life. From down the hall came muffled voices, faint through the carpeted stretch of corridor. Callista's laughter drifted toward me, low, steady, rehearsed. A door closed with a definitive click, punctuating the intrusion. I slipped out of bed, bare feet sinking into the cold fibers of the rug. At the doorway, I paused, listening. No footsteps approached. No voices shifted in my direction. Carefully, I moved down the hall, each step measured, as though walking through a stranger's house. The kitchen light hummed when I flicked it on. Its glow revealed details that clawed at me. The basin held crumbs and a mug with lipstick smudges I didn't recognize. Red, bright, careless. A chair was angled differently than I'd left it. Small, almost imperceptible changes, yet together they screamed, "You don't live here anymore." But the worst absence was louder than all these intrusions combined. My dog. Where was he? He should have bounded toward me the moment I opened the door earlier that evening, his tail wagging, his body warm against my legs, his bark filling the silence. Instead, I had walked into an emptiness that chilled me. Hours earlier, Callista had texted me like it was nothing. "He's at a boarding center. It was easier this way. No permission asked, no explanation offered." My companion, removed like an inconvenience. My chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. This wasn't oversight. This was erasure. I retreated to the small corner room, the one I had chosen as a child when we first moved into the family's old house decades ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out through the window where the blinds cut moonlight into bars across the wall. Memories pressed against me, whispering through time. Summers of long ago when Callista and I would argue over who got which bedroom. She always demanded the larger one, the one with the better view. I remember pleading once, just once, for fairness. My mother had smiled, weary but firm, and said, "You're the calm one, Estelle. Let her have it." As though calmness was currency. As though sacrifice was my duty. As though proving I wasn't selfish meant surrendering pieces of myself. And I had believed her. The memory grew sharper, dragging me further back. One afternoon, I was 11. I wore a locket around my neck. A small silver oval, a gift from our mother. Callista laughed as she snatched it away, running ahead of me to the lake behind the house. I chased her desperately, shouting for her to stop. She only laughed harder. At the water's edge, she flung it into the current. I dove in, frantic, clawing through the water until my arms ached, surfacing with nothing. When I stumbled back, empty-handed and shivering, my mother placed her hand gently on my shoulder and said, "Let it go. It's only a keepsake." Only a keepsake. That day, something broke in me. I learned that my grief would never be defended, that my pain was something I was expected to swallow silently so the world could remain undisturbed. That was the moment I began training myself to disappear. Now, decades later, I realized how deeply that wound had festered. I grabbed my phone, clinging to the hope of digital connection. The family group chat glared back at me, except I wasn't in it anymore. My messages had long gone unanswered, unacknowledged, quietly erased. I scrolled through their updates. Callista had filled the feed with photo after photo of my house, Pictures of smiling faces, cousins, neighbors, all framed against walls I had chosen, corners I had paid for. Her captions cut like salt, rebuilding our legacy. I tapped out a message to my father, thumb trembling. No reply. Not even the faint indicator of him seeing it. Even in the digital world, I had been ghosted. Desperation pressed in. I turned to my laptop. I opened an email draft, typing out words to an aunt who had always spoken softly of fairness. Seconds later, the bounce-back notification slammed into my inbox. Blocked. I tried my niece on Facebook. Her profile was gone from my feed, unfriended. Her photos were there, though, visible to the public. Gatherings at my home, posted with pride, while I had been erased. I sat frozen before the glowing screen, the house I had built now staged like a set in someone else's story. I wasn't just overlooked anymore. I had been erased, written out of the narrative entirely. My blood ran cold. This exile wasn't imposed by strangers, but by the very voices I had carried inside me for years. Family had become a knife, turned against me. Heartbreak and fury collided until I could no longer tell which one ached more. On the edge of the bed, I curled my hands into fists. At first, the tears slipped down in silence, slow, reluctant drops, but soon they came in streams, burning down my cheeks. I didn't cry for the house, not really, nor for the material losses. I cried for myself, for the quiet girl who always yielded, for the version of me who believed peace was worth my silence, for the part of me that thought love meant disappearing. Between sobs, I whispered into the dark. I let it all slide, and they took everything. The words hung in the room like smoke. And then, a knock. Sharp, insistent. I froze, wiping my face with trembling hands, my breath catching in my throat. The sound reverberated through the walls, undeniable, demanding. 3 beats. A pause. Then again, louder. I rose slowly, every muscle taut, every nerve alert. My hand hovered near the doorknob, and I steadied my breathing. From somewhere deep inside me, beneath the years of silence, rose a voice that wasn't afraid anymore. It's time, I whispered. It's time to make noise. When I opened my eyes the next morning, there was a subtle shift in the air. The light filtered differently through the blinds, a sharper kind of brightness, as if the sun itself had taken sides. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the faint hum of the neighborhood waking around me. And then I remembered. The knock. The words I had whispered into the silence. It's time to make noise. The memory lingered as determination settled like steel in my bones. I rose, pulled the blankets aside, and walked straight to the door. With deliberate precision, I turned the lock and then the chain, securing it firmly. That simple sound, a bolt sliding into place, felt like an oath. No one would dismiss me again. I dressed quickly, my movements brisk. A crisp blouse, a pair of dark jeans, hair pulled into a tight ponytail. My reflection in the mirror looked sharper, less tentative. This wasn't the Estelle who yielded. This was someone else, someone ready to act. The locksmith arrived before the sun had fully lifted from the horizon. I had called him the previous night, my voice steady but clipped. Now, he stood at my doorstep, a canvas bag of tools slung across his shoulder, his expression neutral but professional. He worked quietly, methodically. The sound of drills and clicks echoed through the still house as he changed the locks on both the front and back doors, rekeyed the deadbolts, and reinforced the garage entry. I hovered nearby, not out of distrust, but out of vigilance. My arms crossed, jaw tight, I watched each mechanism replaced, every key reissued. This was my safe haven, and I would guard it. When the final lock clicked shut, the sound resonated like a closing gavel. I stepped forward and taped a note to the front door, the letters bold against the white page. This house is under legal investigation. Entry without permission is trespassing. I stepped back and studied the message as though it were scripture, as though the ink itself carried weight. My voice no longer felt like a plea. It was a declaration. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed across the counter. Callista's name flashed on the screen. I inhaled once, then answered. Do you have something to say? I asked, my tone even, controlled. Her reply came wrapped in feigned concern. Why are you doing this to family? The words dripped false sweetness, designed to hook me into guilt. Instead, I tapped my screen and sent her one audio file. Our mother's last voicemail, recorded before she died, played across the line. Estelle, only you deserve that house. Don't let anyone take what you built. The silence that followed was sharper than any insult. Callista had no rehearsed answer for that. I held the line, listening to nothing but her breathing, until she hung up. My heart pounded, but my eyes stayed dry. I set the phone down and exhaled. Minutes later, Rowan arrived, his presence filling the living room with the quiet strength of someone who knew battle when he saw it. He carried a thick folder under one arm, his expression sober. You're not going to like this, he said softly. I motioned toward the couch, offered him coffee, and we sat together amid the faded cushions that had held my solitude for years. He spread the papers across the table like cards in a game where the stakes were everything. Utility statements, property records, permit filings. His brow furrowed as he tapped one sheet. Notice anything odd here? I leaned closer. The electricity account bore my name, but the service address had shifted. Not mine anymore, Callista's. Another page showed the same with the water bill. They switched service addresses, I said, my throat tightening. Rowan nodded grimly. Yes, that's how they masked ownership. But here, look at this signature. He slid forward a document filed at the county office, a renovation permit under my name. At first glance, it looked legitimate. But Rowan pointed out the flaws. The signature was pixelated, too perfect, like it had been scanned and pasted. That's digital forgery, he said, his voice low. This isn't just arrogance. This is fraud. A swell of vindication rose in me, mingling with rage. The tide was shifting. I pushed to my feet, pacing across the room. These walls had once harbored my quiet dreams, my gentle routines. Now they bore witness to my resolve. I stopped mid-step, the words spilling out firm and cold. Let's get them on record. Let's make them pay. Rowan opened his folder to reveal a draft cease and desist letter. The paper looked ordinary, but I could feel the weight of it. You want me to deliver it? He asked. I shook my head. No, I will say it myself. Moments later, I stood on Callista's doorstep. The letter felt heavy in my hand, though it was only a single page. I knocked once, hard. She opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. For a split second, she looked like the little girl who used to hide behind our mother's skirts. But then her features smoothed into that familiar composure, the one she wore like armor. I held myself steady, my voice clear. This is your only warning. Back off. She smiled, disturbingly calm, and with deliberate slowness, she tore the page in half. The sound of paper ripping was soft, almost intimate, but it cut deep. She let the pieces flutter to the floor and tilted her head. Then come stop me, she said. For the first time, I didn't flinch. I met her gaze and replied, I will. Her eyes flickered, shock, fear, and something darker, before she closed the door without another word. I turned, walking back toward my car. The dawn light spilled across the street, gold on the pavement. The air tasted different, brisk, alive, filled with the sharp tang of battle yet to come. The lines had been drawn, and I knew exactly which side I stood on. When I stepped out of my car the next afternoon, the sunlight warmed the pavement, but inside me, something darker and sharper crackled like static. The locks were changed, the warnings delivered, but I knew. The war had barely begun. Callista's words echoed through me like a taunt I couldn't silence. Then come stop me. It hadn't been bravado. It had been a declaration of battle. As I reached my front gate, my phone buzzed in my pocket. One vibration, then another, then a flood. I pulled it free and stared at the screen. 6, 7, 8 notifications stacking on top of one another. A single headline made my blood run hot. A new video, posted publicly by Callista. The title screamed across the top. My sister abandoned this house. I pressed play. There she was, standing in my garden, sunlight haloing her figure like she'd staged the scene. Behind her, blurred into near nothingness, was me, half a shoulder visible in the frame, as though I were an afterthought. She called the place our home, while her voice flowed with false warmth. Comments flooded beneath the video, line after line of strangers shaping a story that was never theirs to tell. Typical selfish sister. She left it vacant. What else was Callista supposed to do? Emotional abuse, plain and simple. I lowered the phone slowly, my stomach twisting as my eyes landed on the porch. There sat the sealed box of family photos I'd meant to unpack weeks ago. There, in the flower beds, the soil I had cultivated with aching knees and careful hands, every detail around me was proof of my life here. Yet online, I was a ghost erased. A storm raged in my chest. My image had been plastered across social media without my permission. My profile picture had been swiped and distorted to make me the villain in her story. My blood thundered so loud it drowned out the faint hum of traffic down the street. I called Rowan. He answered on the first ring. "Seen this?" I spat, no need for preamble. "Yes," he said. His voice was calm, but carried the edge of someone who already had contingency plans forming. "We'll get ahead of it. Meet me at my office in 30 minutes. I dressed quickly, shedding the disheveled fatigue of the last few days for something sharper. A clean blouse, dark jeans, hair tied back in a ponytail tight enough to sting. I refused to arrive looking frantic. I wanted steel. The drive to Rowan's office was both endless and fleeting. Every street I passed felt altered, as though neighbors peered out from behind blinds, weighing which sister's story to believe. By the time I pulled into the lot, the clock seemed to mock me, ticking mercilessly. Rowan's office was a modest brick building just north of downtown, nothing flashy, just solid, like him. A receptionist led me to a conference room where a folder already lay on the table. In thick black marker, the words, "Public Statement Draft." He gestured to it. "We'll post this under your name. Short, factual. Unflappable." Together, we reviewed the stack of evidence. Deed copies, utility bills, ID scans. Each page reaffirmed what I already knew. This home was mine. I let my fingers hover over one sheet that carried the forged signature from the earlier permit filing. The strokes too perfect, scanned and copied. Fraud in black and white. "Truth doesn't need editing," I said quietly, but firmly. Rowan nodded once. I sat at his laptop and typed out a message. Simple, direct. No emotion for Callista to twist. Then I recorded a short video, my voice steady, my eyes locked on the camera. "I never abandoned this home. I have paid taxes, maintained it, lived in it. My name is on the title, the utility accounts, and documents that cannot be faked. We will prove everything." When I pressed post, a strange calm washed over me. I walked outside with my phone in hand, the screen glowing as comments began to pour in. And then, something shifted. Supporters of Callista faltered. "Wait, that's her deed?" One comment read. Another, "If Estelle has the bills in her name, why didn't Callista show them?" The tide wasn't turning completely, but it was no longer one-sided. Possibility cracked open like light through a storm cloud. Minutes later, my phone pinged again. A direct message. The sender's name made me blink. Callista's former friend, someone who had drifted out of her circle years ago. "I'm glad you saw. She's done this before." Tears pricked at my eyes. Not regret, not grief, but validation. A sliver of proof that the mask had slipped before, and others had seen the truth. And then came a sound I hadn't expected. A knock. Soft. Hesitant. I opened the door to find Mrs. Martinez, my next-door neighbor, her hands folded nervously around her phone. She was gentle, kind, her eyes full of apology. "I recorded something a few nights ago," she said quietly, her voice almost trembling. "I didn't know who to give it to." She placed her phone in my hand and looked away. I pressed play. The video was grainy, filmed from across her yard through a sliver in the blinds. But the audio was clear. Callista's voice, dripping with arrogance, inside my home. She'll never fight back. Once the lights switched to my name, it's mine. My heart skipped. My throat tightened. I pressed pause, holding the phone as though it were a weapon forged just for me. This wasn't opinion. This wasn't spin. This was gold, legal gunpowder in my hand. Rowan leaned over my shoulder, his face blanching, then hardening with resolve. "This," he said, voice low, "is what we needed." That evening, I sat in my small back garden. The soil was damp beneath my boots, petals drooping after the morning rain. I cradled a mug of chamomile tea, the steam rising in slow curls. For the first time in days, my hands were steady. The air felt softer, forgiving. The garden no longer carried only intrusion. It carried resilience. I looked up through the branches overhead, the sky deepening into evening, and whispered to myself, "They don't get to narrate my life anymore." As if on cue, my phone shrilled. Rowan's voice came urgent, direct. "Callista's been served," he said. "The court requisition is official." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see it. Around me, the silence of my home deepened, the walls still scarred by betrayal but no longer heavy with despair. They had absorbed my grief, my fury, my silence. Now, they would bear witness to something else. Not surrender, not exile, justice. The summons arrived late in the morning, crisp and official, but my instincts had already told me how the day would unfold. I read the words only once before folding the paper neatly into my bag. The time had come. By the time I pulled into a parking space in front of the courthouse, the Texas sun had just begun to creep above the rooftops, stretching long shadows across sidewalks still damp with dew. I sat for a moment inside the car, hands resting on the steering wheel, the air conditioner humming softly. My suit jacket hung neatly on the passenger seat, the evidence folder tucked securely beneath it like a shield I had forged myself. I inhaled deeply, catching the faint scent of fresh grass and sun-warmed pavement. Today I would not shrink into the background. Today I would not sit quietly in the back row. When I stepped through the heavy double doors of the courthouse, the hush inside wrapped around me instantly. It was a place that demanded gravity. Wood-paneled walls loomed above beige carpeting, every step muffled as though even sound feared judgment here. A scattering of strangers sat on the benches, their expressions solemn, their attention divided between whispered conversations and the clock above the chamber doors. At the defense table, Callista stood tall, posture flawless, shoulders pulled back, lips curved in that faint, smug smile she wore like armor. When her eyes flicked to me, sharp and measuring, I met them without flinching. The bailiff called for silence. Then the sharp crack of the judge's gavel cut through the room, commanding attention. "All rise." We obeyed. I walked forward with deliberate calm, my heels clicking softly against the floor. Each step carried a weight I hadn't felt before, not dread, but power. In my hands I carried proof, the video of Callista speaking casually about taking over the house, the forged permit filed under my name, the utility accounts that had been redirected in deceit. Each piece was not just paper, it was testimony. When I laid the folder on the lectern, the faint snap of its spine echoed louder than it should have. The courtroom quieted, all eyes drawn to the evidence. Callista's lawyer rose smoothly from his chair, his suit impeccable, his voice polished to professional calm. "Your Honor, this is merely a misunderstanding," he began. "An unfortunate attempt to reconcile family disputes. Nothing here warrants such escalation." His tone was steady, but rehearsed, lacking conviction. He spoke like a man clinging to a script already fraying at the edges. The judge regarded him with an unreadable expression. Silence stretched long enough to make the air taut. When it was my turn, I spoke without raising my voice. "There is no mistake here." I tapped the laptop, and the video flickered to life. The speakers carried Callista's voice into every corner of the room. Her words, captured in Mrs. Martinez's recording, rang out clear and cold. "She'll never fight back. Once the lights switched to my name, it's mine. A ripple of gasps broke through the courtroom. Even the clerk paused in his notes. Callista's face lost its color. She turned away, her composure cracking, lips pressed into a thin line. The judge leaned forward, his eyes sharp now. "Ms. Callista," he said, voice clipped. "Your motion is denied." He lifted the gavel and struck once, the sound decisive. "I grant Ms. Estelle exclusive access to the property for the duration of these proceedings." Relief surged through me, quick and fierce, nearly dizzying. I closed my eyes for the briefest moment, allowing myself one heartbeat of peace. But outside, the war had already shifted. As I stepped into the sunlight, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. Callista's social media accounts glowed with backlash. The video she had posted, "My sister abandoned this house," was now buried beneath a tide of skepticism. Sponsors she once flaunted were vanishing quietly, her name being scrubbed from campaign pages. The comments beneath her posts turned from adoration to suspicion. Why didn't she show her receipts? If the deed isn't hers, why is she lying? Meanwhile, my own phone flooded with messages. Some were from friends who had silently watched, now voicing praise. Others came from strangers who expressed shock, relief, even gratitude that someone had stood against a carefully constructed mask. When I returned home, the first sting of victory soured. The garden greeted me not with calm, but with violation. Flowers I had tended lay crushed into the dirt. Soil was overturned, beds trampled with heavy footprints that didn't belong. My breath caught. My hands trembled as I crouched, brushing a bent stem between my fingers. Inside, I pulled up the feed from my security cameras. The grainy nighttime footage confirmed what my heart already knew. Callista's husband, his frame unmistakable, stomping across my yard under cover of darkness. His boots drove into the soil deliberately, carelessly, as if to leave a mark deeper than just the ground. I called Rowan immediately, my voice firm though my chest burned. "He's been here. I have proof. File trespassing." There was no hesitation in Rowan's reply. "Done." Then I dialed 911 myself, fingers steady. I reported the damage, the footage, the forced bend in the basement window's padlock I had noticed while checking the house. The operator's voice was brisk and professional. "An officer will be dispatched." By twilight, I stood once more in my yard, this time under the glare of motion lights I had installed days before. They flickered to life, bathing the garden in harsh white. The cameras hummed quietly, watching with me. The night air smelled faintly of rain, a storm brewing somewhere distant. Rowan arrived, his suit jacket draped over one arm, his expression grim but steady. I handed him full permission to press forward, to prosecute not just for trespassing, but for every unlawful act committed under Callista's name. I looked down at my hands. For the first time in months, they were steady. No trembling, no hesitation. "Let the system do its work," I said softly, my voice almost a vow. "I've done mine." As though the universe wanted confirmation, my phone buzzed again. This time it was the dispatcher. "We have them on record for trespassing," she said. "Are you ready to press charges formally?" I closed my eyes for 1 second, inhaled the taste of rain and dust carried on the evening wind, then answered clearly, "Yes." When I hung up, the darkness around me deepened. The motion lights clicked off, plunging the garden back into shadow. But I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel small. I stood at the center of my yard, listening to the night, and waited. Not for silence, not for surrender, but for morning, for justice. I stepped out of my car at the police station before daylight had fully broken, my hands steady on the steering wheel. The crisp morning air carried a hard edge, as though it knew what was coming. I squared my shoulders and rose. This time, I would not shrink. The arrest had come faster than I ever expected, but I would use it. Inside, officers led Callista and her husband through the halls. They appeared in matching handcuffs. Regina Callista looked stunning, even in that silence, poised defiance in her eyes. Her husband's face was pale. I followed them quietly into the holding area, clutching my folder of evidence. The county website already listed them. Charges, filed, trespassing, forgery, identity theft. And then the headline struck fast. Sister war over suburban property goes viral. One blog post showed Callista's mugshot next to mine, hers taken at dusk under harsh light, mine under calmer conditions. Comments cascaded. "'Bout time the truth came out. She never treated you fair. That's what you get messing with family." Sympathy swung in waves toward me. A producer from a local news station reached out, requesting an interview. I didn't answer, not yet. Back at home, the group chat exploded. My phone lit up with 200 unread messages, some from relatives I barely see. "Is that true? We need family meetings." My uncle texted, "I don't know which side to believe." I calmly posted screenshots of the arrest and the forged documents as a statement. A hush seemed to fall. Then my father called, voice trembling. "I didn't know. I always thought you two were close." I swallowed. "Dad," I said gently, "that's because I was silent." At that moment, the family we once were dissolved into factions. Trust cracked. The battlefield was no longer quiet. Later that afternoon, I sat before my laptop. A new email pinged. The name was anonymous. With trepidation, I opened it. Inside, PDFs, scanned images, spreadsheets. From an accountant who once handled Callista's finances. Files confirming that Callista had opened a trust account under my name, without my knowledge, funneling assets, forging documents. The confession at the end. "I was paid to file the paperwork. I'm sorry." My breath caught. That was the final, irrefutable strand tying her scheme together. I forwarded the docs to Rowan. He exhaled. "This is it." The turning point came when we met with the district attorney's office. I sat quietly as Rowan laid it all out. Mugshots, forged paperwork, emails, utility misdirection, security footage of nighttime trespass. The DA's eyes narrowed. When Rowan said, "We're moving toward felony prosecution," the room went still. Rowan turned, a slight smile on his lips. "We're past defense now. This is a takedown." I didn't stand to cheer, but I felt something deep inside shift. My fists were unclenched, my posture relaxed. I realized I was no longer asking for justice. I was demanding it. That night at home, I retrieved old videotapes, family birthdays, graduations, small moments. I watched myself in the frame, child, sister, daughter. In the background, their voices, their laughter. I whispered, "There was never justice in our house. Just silence." Now that silence belonged to me, tempered by strength. My phone chimed. A new subpoena. "Callista sues you for defamation." The irony nearly tasted bitter. I stared at the screen. She had tried to write me out of my own story. Now, she would pay for having done so. "They're suing me. Let her try." I parked outside the courthouse before dawn's pale light crept across the horizon. I took a deep breath, phone in hand, slipping out of the car and straight into a moment I'd long waited for. The case for defamation was scheduled this morning. They had sued me. Me, of all people. But I was no longer afraid. I was ready. Walking through the corridors, I glimpsed Callista waiting near the courtroom door, her posture rigid, her eyes shielded behind sunglasses. She caught my eye for a heartbeat, then looked away. I raised my chin and carried my folder forward. The judge's chambers loomed ahead. I entered the room with evidence laid clean, the forged financial statements, the trust documents, the security footage, the voicemail from Mom. Callista's legal team appeared uncomfortable. Witnesses stuttered, stories shifted. Her lawyer intervened. "Your Honor, this suit was never meant as something malicious," but he trailed off when I handed over the proof. I spoke firmly. "This is not about revenge. It's about truth." Silence fell. The judge regarded me, his eyes sharp. "Do you understand continuing this may expose you further?" I nodded. "I do, but I believe truth is worth the risk." At that moment, Callista's counsel leaned toward her. I watched as panic flickered across her face. No direct answer came. The judge cleared his throat and dismissed the defamation suit, on the record. In one brief ruling, She was rebuked. Afterward, I recorded a video statement from my car outside the courthouse. I loved my sister, but I will never apologize for protecting myself. It was calm, factual, strong. Within hours, it reached millions. Comments shifted. Finally, she is seen. You deserve this. Class act, Estelle. The weight of the misframing began to crumble. Then came rulings on the fraud case. Callista got a suspended sentence, ordered to pay restitution. Her husband would perform community service and pay fines. I was granted sole ownership of the home and restraining orders to keep them at bay. My reputation, battered for so long, was legally, publicly restored. My phone rang. My father's message. You didn't deserve what happened. I see it now. My fingers hovered over reply, but I didn't respond. I placed the photo frame on my shelf, us as children, smiling. I whispered, goodbye. No hate, just release. Later, I opened the locket from Mom, dried and restored, with the letter inside. My hands trembled. Then I filled the living room with neighbors and survivors, hosting a support group for those betrayed by family. We sat in a circle, shared stories, cried, healed. My house finally felt alive again. The late afternoon sun draped my backyard in a soft, golden haze as I stepped through the back door, the echo of the previous chapter still resonating in my bones. I closed the door gently behind me and stood for a moment with my eyes shut, letting everything settle. The storm was over, but its tremors remained. Inside the locket from Mom, the letter slipped free and unfolded onto my palm. Her handwriting trembled, faded with age. I saw more than I said. I knew you would have to be the strong one. Forgive me for making you earn everything alone. Tears spilled, not grief exactly, but the release of decades. She had borne more silence than I ever realized. I whispered into the quiet, I forgive you. And me. Stepping into the garden, over paths I once nurtured, I touched the walls that had witnessed whispered arguments, quiet tears, and stolen dreams. I knelt by patches still recovering from the sabotage. With spade in hand, I replanted blooms, lavender, marigold, wildflowers, assembling color where destruction had reigned. The soil seemed to drink in the effort, each seed a promise that pain does not end in ruin. I wandered to the circle of benches I had built from reclaimed oak. Today, they were ready for those who had walked behind me. I opened the house and set chairs in a semicircle. It was time to reclaim community. By late afternoon, neighbors gathered, older women whose voices had been hushed by husbands' dictates, estranged siblings who carried hidden scars, people who'd been gaslit into silence. I welcomed them home. We sat under the shade of a maple. A woman whose hands trembled spoke. I thought perhaps I was overreacting, until I heard your story. I smiled gently. You're not. You're just not quiet anymore. The silence broke into soft nods, murmured, me too, replies. We talked, we cried, we shared. I watched their faces, relief, recognition, slow healing, paint over years of shame. That night, in the quiet of my restored home, the phone remained silent. Callista had not called. I retrieved the second letter from Dad. When you're ready, I'd like to visit. I tucked it into a drawer. I was not refusing the past, but not reopening old wounds either. My boundary firm, but not bitter. I sat in darkness, letting the silence stretch. I said into the silence, healing isn't reunion. It's choosing not to bleed when touched. The quiet was no longer emptiness. It felt like a buffer, like strength. Before dawn, I recorded my final message. To anyone who's ever been told they're overreacting, this is proof you weren't. Silence isn't strength if it protects the wrong people. Speak, even if your voice shakes. I watched the screen fade to black. My voice lingered in the air. I closed my eyes and whispered. She wasn't angry. She was done. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people you once trusted the most. But standing up for yourself, even if it means standing alone, can be the first step toward true healing. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that dive deep into emotion, truth, and resilience.